All right, so we're going to go and get started. Welcome to the second episode of our ongoing series here around solving ServiceNow data challenges. This episode is calling Securing ServiceNow Data Against the Unexpected, hosted by Cerna Solutions. And we also have, our guest, Michael here from Perspectium as well.
Thanks, Josh. Just to introduce myself and Perspectium for those who have not attended our series yet. Perspectium is an integration as a service company, and we are centered around ServiceNow and its data. And so we provide ways to either integrate ServiceNow data with other tools or applications or even other instances, or pull ServiceNow data out for analytics, archival, and backup and restore type functionality. So thanks for having us today, Josh.
Yeah, of course. And Cerna Solutions, for those who don't know, is a elite ServiceNow partner who provides services across the platform and specifically has a lot of expertise around integrations and store apps. So, very interesting to have Michael here talking about kind of the Perspectium view on things. Just as a reminder, we did previously have our first episode around achieving data transparency, and that was really focused, like Michael said, around getting data out of ServiceNow to facilitate centralized roll-up reporting for big organizations, and a couple other use cases around that. Obviously we're episode 2 today, extending or securing ServiceNow data against the unexpected, and we'll have an upcoming webcast here most likely in February that's called Extending ServiceNow Workflows to Partners. So talk about the third one here a bit more at the end. As we get into this, feel free to ask questions via the chat. We'll make sure to either hit them as part of the webcast or circle back to them at the end as they come. So I mean, I think you see securing ServiceNow data against the unexpected, and you think about the kind of when we talk about that, I guess generally outside the ServiceNow ecosystem, we think about backup and restore, right? We say, well, I've got it in a system, it's got important data, and I'm gonna back it up in case something unexpected happens, and I can restore it. And that's kind of the traditional model. And those could be things such as error loss or data loss or deletion, right? So I've actually seen an example there where we were working with a customer, and one of their developers actually just published a catalog item to production, and it hit an edge case and kind of spun out of control and ended up commenting all of their incidents in a loop, right? So they ended up with hundreds of comments in the journal entry of all the incidents, and it became this kind of big ongoing effort, right, where we had all hands on deck to write cleanup activities that were going to fix that and make it so the instance were usable again, and they effectively had an outage. So that's one of the examples I've seen, and I think we'll get into maybe how Perspectium can help with that.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that we can do. If we had taken a backup of all the incoming data, we could either roll back to a recent instance of our ServiceNow, or we could just take this backup that we had been recording effectively, and then overwrite the data that had happened in error. So there's a couple of ways, to approach that. One other use case that we see a lot of, or not a lot of, but it does come up, is the event of a failed upgrade of ServiceNow. Now, ServiceNow is really robust, right? And in an upgrade, you're continuing, it's typically live, and you're continuing to create incidents and cases and all of those other things that we use it for. And so what we're able to do is, if there's a failure in the upgrade for whatever reason, if it doesn't align with our applications, our custom applications, and we've got to roll back to the snapshot that was taken pre-upgrade, then we're able to take the backup that Perspectium has been taking of the specific data and then put it into that updated version. So we're current on all cases and all data that's been entered during that upgrade process. So we'll get a little more into that, I think, a little further in our conversation. But I did want to bring that up because that is, a potential problem area for a lot of organizations as they upgrade their ServiceNow and seek to, keep data current and real time and not have any data loss.
Yep. Yeah, that's a good one. And then one of the other ones we've seen or seen people at least consider, right, is well, what do I do if something malicious happens, right? Which has the same outcome. Data's been lost or corrupted as part of, maybe a data breach of some kind, or even like, issues with third-party libraries, et cetera. And while these things are kind of rare, everybody knows, and it's become pretty standard practice here, that as we start using kind of, enterprise tools, right, and we introduce them to our environments, we want to know, hey, what do we do if something happens? And ServiceNow does do daily backups. They typically run those after hours. They are able to restore those things, but it is a pretty, it's the nuclear option, right, to do a full restore from a ServiceNow backup, because you lose everything between the time that the backup ran and the time you restore it, and you really do have an outage as part of the restore activity, right? So that can be, especially depending on what you're using your instance for and how much volume you have going on there, can be really disruptive to the business. And I've even seen a scenario where you restore partial data by restoring to a different instance and then copying that data over. But every part of that required a tremendous amount of kind of effort and technical expertise to make sure the right things were getting copied in the right way. And it did, it wasn't a solution that occurred in a couple hours. It became a couple day exercise. So those things exist. They can be painful, and one of the things we encounter with lots of people as they're undergoing the ServiceNow journey is they want to understand what options exist. So I think this is kind of a good time to talk about this.
Yeah, and you mentioned that the restoring from a ServiceNow backup is considered kind of the nuclear option, right?
Yep.
And the cost can be quite large for that, especially when we have your scenario that you talked about, where it was really only the journal fields on the task that were messed up. And so it's nice to have a more surgical approach to it that says, can we restore a component of ServiceNow? Maybe it's incident, maybe it's even more specific than that. Maybe it's the journal fields, or there was a mass update to all the priorities, and hopefully that would never happen. But really, we were afforded that opportunity to be a little more surgical in our approach to this type of a backup and restore with Perspectium. But let me tell you a little bit about just how that works and the types of solutions that we're providing from a backup and restore perspective. And there's a few different approaches. One that we talked about last time is we take data out of ServiceNow, or we copy data out of ServiceNow on a real-time basis and put it in a local data store, right? And it may be cloud or maybe local on-prem, either way. And that data is available to archive for whatever period of time that you want to keep it. And it could be restored back to a ServiceNow instance.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that we're providing that's actually one of our more recent products that we've developed is very specific to backup and restore, in that's really its whole function. We're not trying to copy data for reporting or analytics or anything like that. What we're doing, we can provide as part of the product some cloud storage to actually make a backup of ServiceNow and store it there. And when you approach that through our native application in ServiceNow, you would have the options to choose groups of tables by subject. For example, maybe I want to copy the ITSM module tables that are relevant for me. I may want to make a backup of those. And so I can just select ITSM. That automatically grabs incident, task, problem, change, and some of those other related tables. I may want to create a custom list, and I want to bring those over, but I also want ITOM and maybe ITBM, bring over some of our project data and back that up. Yeah. So I can do that. I can stick it in a cloud storage, and then if something happens, I need to restore it. It's right there. All I've got to do is go into, again, the Perspectium native application and pull that over. So that's the other approach.
Yeah, that's really interesting. What about, so you mentioned the ability to do the partial restore, right? And that certainly would have been tremendously useful for us when we had a customer with incident and corruption effectively. Is there, what about the challenge we have, with kind of traditional snapshot options where you're taking a snapshot of the database and you can store that snapshot, but then everything after the snapshot is lost?
Yeah, so good question. So in that scenario, that's when you're backing up to a complete instance of ServiceNow, right? It's not a partial thing, and that would be done through ServiceNow. So the way that our backup and restore works is it's pushing data out on a real-time basis to make a copy of it. And so it can also do it in a bulk schedule if you wanted specific timestamps to a larger set of data. So in that case, you would just use the timestamps to filter down what data I want to restore. You would recognize, okay, we had to restore back to our ServiceNow snapshot dated January 1st. And then, we can easily take all of those records created between that time frame, between now and January 1st, and just run those back into ServiceNow. And that would be done again through our native app. And I keep talking about our native app, and I probably haven't told you much about what it is. So I'll give you a very brief description of it.
Okay.
So just an update set that we would have you install in ServiceNow. And in this update set, it connects to Perspectium's integration mesh. Okay, it's basically a cloud-based message bus. And that's where the queues are that we would send data out to put it wherever we want to put it, whether it's in this backup repository that we talked about that we provide, and then also if it was a local database. So in the native application, we would decide, are we doing a regular backup and restore, and like I talked about before, what groups of tables are we going to back up and restore? You would also set, do I want to do it on a real-time basis, or do I just want to do this nightly? So all that flexibility is right there, and the control is completely in the hands of our ServiceNow admins.
Okay.
So,
that's really interesting. And I know we talked about this last time, but it sounds like there's or Perspectium uses a mechanism for this data, the copying the data back and forth, right? So backup and restore. That's pretty low impact on the ServiceNow instances, or at least as low impact as it can be. We had a question actually, and this is a good question, is, what's the time frame around some of these activities, right? If I decide to back up a set of tables like you described, like ITSM, how quickly does that complete? And then if I were going to go action a store for, some subset of that data, what would that look like?
Okay, so good questions. So the technology that drives our solution is fundamentally different from the way that most people would do this if they're building their own homegrown solution. Typically, people doing this on their own, and even really all of our competitors, they're making a REST or API call into ServiceNow. And when you're dealing with large, massive quantities of data, and you're making these continual calls in, you start to risk performance impact. So our approach is a little different. What we're doing is we're doing an HTTPS post. So we're basically pushing the data out of ServiceNow, and we do it on a scheduled basis. And we can even be as granular as assigning it to a specific node inside of ServiceNow if we want to control which ones do all the work. So I'm getting a little bit more technical here for the technical folks. And so I'll back off from that just a little bit, but basically, time-wise, it's difficult to say because it really depends on the amount of data that a company is pushing through their instance, and then how large or how extensive the time set is for that particular backup. Okay.
Right.
Are we backing up just one day's worth of records? Are we just sending one record over? We call it virtually real time because it's within a few seconds that it gets to the destination. Well,
that's still a tremendous difference, right? Because there's if I were to have to do a full restore, right, I've got to restore the entire data set. And what you're describing is the ability to pick the things that have changed or pick the things in a certain time frame. So you're already talking about a much smaller subset of data that you actually have to write, not to mention all the things that you've described as far as design decisions, I guess, that make things more efficient.
Yeah, and that's the key word. We're trying to make this more efficient so that we're not just being kind of clunky with these big updates that lose large amounts of time's worth of data.
Yep. Yeah, of course. Interesting. And then, we've got these two components, backup and restore. These I imagine, I mean, these are things that you have to do in lots of scenarios that aren't even just restoring data. Have you seen, what other use cases, I guess, have you seen people use kind of the copy in, copy out functionality for?
Well, there's a couple that people use for kind of a migration type of approach. What we're seeing a lot of right now is customers that are on an old instance, say, 8+ year old instance of ServiceNow. They've done a lot of custom development in their instance, and they have a lot of applications that they've built, and they want to go back to more of an out-of-the-box type of an approach in their ServiceNow instance.
Mm-hmm.
And so we find that a lot of people want to migrate a lot of their old data as they change to this new system, right? And then for the tech folks in the room, they're moving from an Oracle DB and back end of ServiceNow to a Maria DB.
Yeah.
And so there's some different requirements there, and the structure can be a little bit different, and there's some complexity there. So, and so that's one of the places that we step in and are really able to help. We have a medical company and a banking company right now that are using us for that specific reason, of simplifying their data and deciding what they want to bring over, because they have this history of data that they're bringing over to their new instance of ServiceNow. So again, you have control. What do I want to bring, right? If I have an incident form and it's, in the past 10 years, we've built it up to, 100 fields on the form, and we decide we don't need all those anymore. We only want to bring short description, priority, the state. Then we do that. We decide that's all we're going to bring over. In one of those use cases of our customers that I mentioned, they also decided that prior to 2 years ago, we don't want to bring that data over. Instead, we just want to stick it in a Snowflake database. And so you have that option as well. So you can bring over what's relevant. And then if you have archival or regulatory requirements for keeping data, you can push that off to somewhere like a data store where you could, you could do analytics. You could just keep it in case you're ever audited, or you can do machine learning on it as well. So our customers have found a lot of value in using our product for that as well.
Yeah, and I've personally run into that a lot, right? As you run into organizations that have some regulation, right? Whether that's PCI, SOX, something medical related like HIPAA, HAR, anything like that. You run into these scenarios where certain parts of your data need to be kept for a period of time. And we've seen lots of variation of that, right? Sometimes people, they say, well, we're going to keep it in the system where it was created, which means, hey, I can't, sorry, we're going to keep the system in like an archival, right? Like a vault, somewhere nice and safe. And sometimes if it's like, I've seen requirements for 21 years of data, and in some environments hit too many things on the task table by that period of time, and they want to remove stuff older than 5 years, but where do I put it? And we've helped customers with that, and it can be a pretty big undertaking, and it sounds like that might be a good use case here.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing that it takes into account too, in that situation where you're looking at long periods of time that you've got to store the data due to regulations, is, and we don't want anyone to do this, but if at some future date you decided as a company to move away from ServiceNow to some other tool, and again, don't do that, not a good idea, because ServiceNow is such a robust and powerful tool. But should that decision ever be made, your data is already backed up and it's already archived, and there's no process at that point that you've got to go through to meet those requirements. So,
well, and then the other thing too is you could be archiving something, you could be deleting it out of ServiceNow older than a certain date. And if for some reason at some point in the future you need to restore that to a ServiceNow instance, prod or sub-prod, to do reporting or something, it sounds like that functionality would be a native piece as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It would just be a matter of subscribing to that table that you stored it to and bringing it back into ServiceNow along with its related tables. So that would be something that would be critical in that scenario, is that we make sure we bring over related tables and data.
That's really interesting. So this is something we don't encounter, all the time, right? Not every company has this challenge, but it's always a big point of discussion when they do. And actually, I have a utility provider right now who they have this process of instead of worrying about kind of what's kept or deleted in each of their enterprise systems, they, as a system is onboarded, decide which of the data from that system is critical, and then they want to replicate that data real time to a system that's retaining everything for them. And so it's kind of like this, like archive, kind of not, in the sense that they're not just worried about stuff that's way old. They're doing it in real time so that you still then have freedom to be pretty agile in ServiceNow. And when talking to them about that, it was a really big concern. They're really concerned about transparency and all the types of things there. And certainly something you can accommodate with ad hoc integrations, but it sounds like this is kind of the all-in-one solution that covers that use case as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned having different instances of ServiceNow. That's another use case that that we've seen be used. Actually, we have a customer, one of our customers, Qualcomm, is using it, using us, Perspectium, to copy data in real-time fashion as it's created in production to a sub-production instance. And the reason they're doing that is so they can develop their apps with the production load, right?
Yep.
So if they're creating 20 million records or 20 million incidents a day in production, and I don't know what the number is for them, and I don't want to know at this point, but if they're creating a large quantity of data, they need to be able to develop their applications against that type of a throughput.
Yep.
And so Perspectium's making that possible for them, because once a record is created in production, it immediately is created in their development instance of ServiceNow, and makes that development really a realistic type of a testing for that. So.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So something we run into all the time, right, is customers. Customers have this scenario where they've got their production environments, and they got their test environments, and they got their development environments, and those may look they may look pretty different. And I've got a customer's financial institution that has this policy where they can't connect stuff in the test layer to stuff in the production layer. Well, then how do you do realistic testing and test based on like production CMDB data, for example? And cloning and whatnot there can be pretty painful. So this isn't actually something I've seen done before, but it would be really interesting to take the things that your tests are dependent upon and replicate the production data down in real time to help facilitate that. That's very interesting.
Yeah. And this one fit into this segment because and I've experienced this as a ServiceNow developer as well prior to working at Perspectium, is everything works fine in test under a small load, but then we move it to production and we suddenly have an unexpected result, right? It's just not handling things. So yeah, it's important that everyone knows, the customers know that's an option, and that's a benefit that Perspectium can add.
Awesome. So yeah, migration replication, I think we're seeing there's 3 use cases mentioned here in the replication that you've seen. Both of these are interesting. We're seeing more and more customers like you described migration earlier, find or make the decision to move to a fresh or new ServiceNow instance. Most of the time that's driven by the fact that they were early adopters of ServiceNow, maybe even before the letters, right? And back in like the late 2000s. And they built lots of functionality to solve their business needs, and now ServiceNow has parity with that with ServiceNow supported apps, right? And so they're saying, hey, rather than building and maintaining this thing on my own, why don't I adapt the ServiceNow features that are doing all those things? And often those customers are really, really heavily invested. They're using lots of the platform and supporting lots of the business. And then when it comes time to migrate things to the new clean, fresh, snow white stack, as you called it here, that becomes very large conversation. It takes a lot of time, and it it's very complex, and it very interesting to see that there's a solution for that here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if there's any takeaways that I could hope that all our attendees had from this meeting is that Perspectium can give you control you need to what you're backing up, what you're going to restore. We can make it as granular as you want, down to the field level. or an entire instance, or even subsets of groups, and really reduce the time that's needed to make these types of big migration, especially as we look at large quantities of data. So,
yep.
Yeah.
And one of the things, because I know we talked about this before, you and I previously, but one of the things we talked about potentially covering here was the acquisition scenario. And I actually just got reminded because somebody posted a very good question in chat, right? But we've had a number of customers where you've got one company purchasing or merging with another company, and they both got ServiceNow, and there's some consolidation effort that's going to happen in the future, right? And what do we do then to retain that data? And I think we talked about that before, and you said that you had seen customers use Perspectium to do that, right?
Yeah, with acquisitions, there's a couple of different approaches that I've seen, and that are all pretty reasonable approaches. And one of them is to combine instances, right? The parent company may want to eventually be the master and actually migrate all those users over. Yep. And so there'll be a period of time where you want to have incidents that are created in one instance of ServiceNow automatically appear in the other, so there's complete visibility. But they may not be working in the parent system yet. Yep. But you want that continual data flow back and forth, so there's a real-time picture on both sides. And then it makes the actual transition when it's time to bring subsidiary into the parent instance of ServiceNow. It's a more seamless transition for them because all their data is already there.
Yep.
There's not a big, massive effort to migrate data. Yep. Right? We've already brought over the users and we've kept those in sync real time. We've already been keeping the cases and the incidents real time sync. And so it just makes it a lot easier. So that's one case where we've seen a kind of a gradual transition. And typically, I think in a lot of cases we don't see the big bang approach with those types of migrations. It's more of a, they'll move over a group and work their way across the company. So that's one approach. There is the other idea also that you could do a big bang approach and just move everyone at once. And then there's an exercise of going through, okay, what's going to go over? What are we going to bring from child company to parent company? And these fields don't matter anymore because we have new policies that we're following. Yeah. And so you have, again, complete control over what you want to bring over and how granular it could be. So again, largely the same functionality, just a new application and use case.
Yeah, that's interesting. So something that just, when you described that, it just occurred to me is we've seen lots of customers go through that process, the acquisition process, consolidation, et cetera. We've helped with it a number of times. One of the things that almost always seems to be a challenge is, okay, we've announced the acquisition and we're building a roadmap to consolidate technology. And these things take, 1 to 3 to 5 years. It takes a long time. But in the meantime, maybe I'm running a vulnerability response program in both ServiceNow instances, and the new company wants to be able to report on vulnerability across both companies in their instance. So what you just described, which is the hey, while you're using the thing separately, replicate stuff across, and then it's an easier transition. It also solves that midterm reporting gap where you've got to be able to report on the whole program of things in one place.
Yeah, exactly. And that will provide a lot more visibility and insight into what's going on as you're looking at it from a governance perspective. So
yeah, absolutely. And then we have one other question here, which was, is this capability, and this was, I think, around the migration and replication, is this capability included with the data sync subscription, or is it a separate subscription? Do you know the answer to that?
So that one, it is typically sold as part of data sync, but I would have to defer to the account executives for a specific example or a specific case if there's a customer already or if somebody's considering it. To give the details on that.
Okay, so yeah, good question. I think we'll have to follow up on that one then. All right, so anyone who has any other questions, feel free, please, to put them in chat. As always, Michael, it was nice talking to you. For anyone who joined us, you're welcome to or we encourage you rather to stay tuned. We'll have the link to the third webinar here shortly, and we'll distribute that. Oh, I think Anna actually did it here in the chat. Thank you, Anna. So if you look at the chat, you can subscribe to the webinar or the third webinar around extending workflows to partners. And in the meantime, please do follow and subscribe to both Cerna and Perspectium. There's some links here in the webinar.